the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Hello, good evening. You're with GB News. I'm Sam Francis in the GB Newsroom. The headlines at 6. Well, in the last hour, it has been confirmed that this week's planned strikes on the London Underground have been suspended. Members of the RMT were due to walk out in protest over a 5% pay offer, leaving hundreds of thousands of passengers facing severe travel disruption in the capital. However, the union's General Secretary, Mick Lynch, says that the planned action will no longer go ahead. That's after progress has been made in discussions with the TfL today. Well, we're also being warned that snow is on the way as an amber cold health alert has been issued for parts of England. The Met Office has also issued a yellow weather warning from 4 o'clock tomorrow morning. That means that snow and ice is likely to affect roads and train services in parts of Greater London, Kent, Surrey, East Sussex and also West Sussex. Meanwhile, more than 170 flood warnings are still in place across England and over 1,800 properties have been damaged by floodwaters. The Prime Minister has today been speaking with some of the residents affected in Oxford. He claims that they were at pains to say that the Environment Agency's response to flooding had been great. Rishi Sunak also met Environment Agency workers at their depot on Osney Island to see firsthand their battle with rising river levels. The Prime Minister says the government's flood defences are working.
There have been many people affected by what's happened over the past week, but also 49,000 homes have been protected from flooding as a result of that investment, and also things like the pumps that I've been seeing here today and the flood barriers. Just in the community I've been walking around, hundreds of homes have been protected because of those investments. But of course this is going to be devastating for those who are impacted, which is why there's financial support in place. But overall, the investment that's going into flood defences is at a very, very high level.
Well, in other news, the Conservatives have chosen the partner of disgraced former MP Peter Bone to replace him. According to the party chair, Richard Holden, Helen Harrison was selected as the new candidate for Wellingborough at a meeting of members this afternoon. A by-election is being held there after Mr Bone was found to have indecently exposed himself to a staff member and then trapped them in the bathroom of a hotel room. He has, though, denied the allegations. Meanwhile, Rishi Sunak has denied having hesitations about the government's Rwanda scheme. That was during his term as Chancellor. The BBC claims to have seen documents where the Prime Minister expressed scepticism about the plan. He said it was, though, his job to ask probing questions about every policy that came across his desk. Shadow Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson says she's sceptical.
It's far from clear whether the plan will have sent anyone to Rwanda because, you know, we've sent more Home Secretaries to Rwanda than we have asylum seekers. And even if Rwanda were to be an effective intervention, well, even if it were to be effective, you're talking about between 100 to 200 asylum seekers. It's 1% of the backlog of claims that we're facing at the moment. So it's just not the answer. It's a gimmick. What we need to have is a serious plan, as Labour has set out, around tackling those cases, that huge backlog of cases, and ending the use of inappropriate accommodations such as hotels.
The UK is set to invest £300 million in fuel to power the next generation of nuclear reactors. The funding will support domestic production of uranium fuel that's required by most reactors, and it's currently only commercially produced by Russia. The government hopes the programme will allow the UK to supply reactor fuel to the rest of the world and therefore to help further isolate Moscow. And investigators are hunting for part of the fuselage that blew off an Alaska Airlines aircraft yesterday while it was mid-air. Dozens of planes have been grounded in the US after the plane made an emergency landing when a hole appeared where the window had previously been. 177 people were on board and luckily no one was hurt. The US airlines regulator has ordered inspections of all Boeing 737 MAX 9 jets, and investigators believe the piece of the plane is somewhere near Portland in Oregon, and they're asking anyone who might find it to contact the police. This is GB News. For more, we're on TV, digital radio and on our website, gbnews.com. Now, though, it's time for the Camilla Tominey Show.
Good morning. Welcome back to the first Camilla Tominey show of 2024. Now, joining me in the studio is Dr Sir Liam Fox, Conservative MP for North Somerset, former Defence Secretary and Conservative Party Chairman. I say Dr Sir Liam Fox because you were knighted very recently, weren't you?
Yes, indeed. New Year's Honours List.
Very happy about that, I would imagine.
Of course, it's nice. But I like to think it's particularly because of the work I was doing with the Down syndrome and the bill that I took through and the charity Give Us Time that I run that gives holidays to service families. So I like to think it's not just for me, it's for them.
No, good stuff. Well, huge congratulations. Let's get stuck into Tory politics now, because obviously it's going to be a seminal year for the Conservative Party. Chris Skidmore announcing his resignation. It seems to me that he's handed a pass to Labour on this. He was the Energy Minister. The government has said that actually it wants to renew more oil and gas licences into the future because there's an acceptance that we still have a reliance on fossil fuels despite the approach to net zero. And yet at the same time he said, well, no, sorry, this isn't good enough for me, and seems to be siding with Keir Starmer about this issue, and therefore once again has undermined the Prime Minister. We've got 3 by-elections still to come. What's your reaction to that?
Well, first of all, I think he's wrong on substance. Energy security for the country is about ensuring that we've got sufficient variety in the sources of our energy. We're going to have to use oil and gas for a long time, even if we decarbonise our economy.
Yes.
And it therefore makes sense to have security of supply, not be dependent on someone else to supply it to us, but to have it for ourselves. I think that is good governance. I think the Prime Minister's right on that. And then I think there's the second issue. If your seat is being abolished in the boundary changes, which Chris Skidmore's is, and you cause an unnecessary by-election, it's not only costing taxpayers money, it's a slap in the face to your own party workers who've loyally tried to get you elected over the years, to your parliamentary colleagues and the wider party. And I think it's self-indulgent and I think it's disloyal. OK, fair enough. I think Chris Skidmore obviously isn't here to defend himself, but at the same time, there is this question of what comes next for Rishi Sunak. How do you think, as a former party chairman, this election is going to pan out? What's your reaction, first of all, to the announcement that we should have an autumn rather than a spring election? You might have caught John Sargent there, who's a seasoned professional when it comes to watching such matters, and he's making the point, why not go in the spring, have a really strong budget in March, take the country to the polls early, show confidence in your own policies, rather than leaving the summer to happen, more, no doubt, small boats arrivals across the Channel. That could destabilise the Conservatives' position when it comes to the autumn. Well, of course, all the options remain open to a Prime Minister, especially now that we got rid of the 5-year Parliament Act. But of course, you need to look at the other way as well. If inflation continues to fall, people feel more money in their pockets. They've just had a tax cut with the cut in national insurance this week. People will begin to feel better off. And it's all often about expectations in an election. The government needs to start to tell its story better, however.
Yes.
So if you think back, this government began way back in 2010 with the Chief Secretary, the outgoing Labour Chief Secretary, saying there's no money left. And indeed, the government deficit was at 11% then, which was a record high in peacetime. We got that down to 2%, under 2% by 2019, which was just as well, because the pandemic hit us. Because we'd had fixed those public finances, we were able to spend $400 billion on the pandemic Rishi Sunak was able to launch his furlough scheme, which protected 11.7 million jobs. Had we not done that, we wouldn't have our economy growing faster.
He's not been thanked for furlough, though, has he? I mean, the Conservatives never get thanked for giving people money. Well, this is the trouble. And so he's already, you know, the Conservative, you'll still have this narrative of 13 years of Tory rule, 14 now, we can say, because we're in 2024, Liam. And at the end of the day, you've got reform and the prospect of a Nigel Farage resurgence really threatening the party. Isn't it simply because Rishi Sunak and his cabinet are too wet? They're more left-wing than you are. The Conservatives just aren't conservative enough, and that's why reform are coming in.
No, I think to finish what I was saying, I think it's partly that we're not telling this story as a whole narrative. If we hadn't had the furlough, if we hadn't kept the economy afloat, we wouldn't be growing faster than France or Germany after the pandemic. That wouldn't have allowed us to spend 78 billion after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, when prices went up. And sometimes I think that politicians, especially when a party's been in office for a while, they forget that they have to tell a whole story.
Sure.
It's not just about delivery. That's what Ocado does. It's about the vision we have for the country. We believe in a smaller state. We believe in lower tax. We believe that we should give people greater freedom to make their own choices.
You can only tell that story. You can only tell the story of sort of Thatcherite politics, that you believe in lower tax and spend, that you believe in enabling businesses to be deregulated and have freedom to succeed and employ more people, if you're actually doing it. The perception of the Conservative government right now is they're doing the opposite of what Thatcher did. Well, that actually we're high tax, we're high spend, businesses are being tied up in unnecessary bureaucratic knots. I mean, would you start a business in the UK today, Liam?
Yes, as lots of businesses do. Startups.
What, with corporation tax 6% higher than it was?
Businesses starting up don't pay corporation tax. Mrs Thatcher wasn't faced with a global pandemic.
But she was faced with a winter of discontent in the 70s.
Well, that was before she came to office.
I know, so the foundations weren't great, and she grew the economy.
So because, remember, we took that government deficit down from a phenomenal number that Labour left behind, which they would do again, back down to only 2%. That enabled us to be able to spend the money on the pandemic. Now, if we hadn't had the pandemic, we'd have been in a great position to reduce taxes.
I appreciate that.
And all of that. And it's only because of our success in controlling public finances and rebalancing them that we were able to deal with that global emergency. People, I think, don't appreciate that. And part of the problem there is that we don't tell the story. And I think that we need to explain that much better. And Rishi Sunak, who's one of his great achievements as Chancellor, was being able to keep all those small businesses afloat, 11.7 million jobs protected. He wouldn't have been able to do that if George Osborne hadn't, as Chancellor, got those public finances back in balance.
But what would you like to see in the budget in March? Because there's been talk about scrapping IHT. Would you support that?
I would rather see that we got our thresholds back under control and we took people out of tax. And I think that if your message is that people have had to pay more tax because we've faced the pandemic and the consequences of Putin's invasion of Ukraine, and people understood that we had to get our balance back after that, if the message was that ordinary people have to pay more tax to get us over that hump, then once we're past it, our priority's got to be to get that tax back down again, not IHT, which is an inheritance tax, doesn't affect that very many people. And
so when you talk about the thresholds, are you worried about this fiscal drag of people into the top rate now, £52,000? We even heard that Rishi Sunak had met with Dominic Cummings. Cummings had suggested raising that threshold from 52,000 to 100,000. Is that the kind of radical move that the Chancellor's going to have to come up with?
Well, we should do what we can to get taxes down. But not put our public finances at risk again. We've made a lot of progress. We had this terrible problem with the public finances during the pandemic. We've got past that. Now we need to do what Conservatives do well, which is sound, sensible, predictable economic management so that people and businesses can plan for the future with much less uncertainty than they've had.
How worried are you about the threat from reform, currently polling at about 10%, in some polls polling above the Liberal Democrats?
Well, I think that says more about the Liberal Democrats than anything else.
It says a lot about the Tories, though, doesn't it?
Well, I think you'll see the Conservatives recover, as governments often do. I do think that, and I think I look at elections like '92, you know, when we right up until polling day, people said we'd no chance of winning. We actually won with an overall majority. And you think of the years, even up to 1987, where Mrs Thatcher had horrible years in 85 and 86, but the government recovered because it's when you get to an election, it's not an opinion poll, it's a choice. And it won't be whether you actually like the Tories or not. It's whether you think the Tories will be a better government.
But it'd be problematic if Nigel Farage takes the helm of reform, won't it?
Well, we managed to win the elections when he was at the helm of UKIP. And, of course, that actually damaged Labour, at least as much, I think, as it damaged the Conservatives. The Liberal Democrats are a particular problem. You would have expected them to have recovered much more in the current circumstances. They've not recovered at all, and that leaves a bit of a vacuum.
On that, very briefly, do you think Davy's got questions to answer on this post office scandal? Yeah,
I do. I think that was it credible that you had an outbreak of criminality among sub-postmasters without questioning that? And I think part of the problem is this. If it's the choice between people and IT, you presume that the IT is correct and not the people.
Yeah.
And that's a modern day
problem. So the Liberal Democrat leader should do what? Explain himself in the House of Commons?
Well, I think he will have to explain in the House of Commons the decisions he took at the time, or the decisions he didn't take at the time, and why he thought that, you know, this was, if officials tell you that there's a big outbreak of criminality, you simply accept that. And can I ask you a quick yes or no question? Paula Vanel's and her CBE, should she be stripped of it? I don't know. I think that's always a difficult question because people make mistakes. What else have they done to get that award? That's not for me to say. OK. Lots more to come. I'm going to be speaking to the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Laura Trott, in just a moment. Stay tuned.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
to find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Now, still lots more to come. In just a minute, I'm going to be joined by the chair of the One Nation group of Tory MPs, Damian Green. Laura Trott, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, will also be speaking to me. And I'll be discussing all things education with Bridget Phillipson. She's the Shadow Education Secretary. I'm also going to be joined by polling expert Matt Goodwin, who's going to be on hand to talk us through where the polls are as we enter 2024. First of all, let's bring Damian Green into the conversation now. He's the Conservative MP for Ashford. He's chair of the One Nation caucus of Tory MPs, former de facto Deputy Prime Minister and Policing Minister. Damian, lovely to see you this morning. Let's talk about your One Nation group. Many on the right blame you because they say that you're too soft as Tories, you're too much like Lib Dems. You're the ones that are heralding in this reform resurgence with the possibility now of Nigel Farage re-entering the political fray. Is that fair criticism?
No, every bit of that is wrong.
Why?
Because we're not Liberal Democrats, we're Conservatives.
You're soft Tories, though.
We're a Conservative tradition that goes back for as long as the Conservative Party has existed as an organisation.
Yes.
Actually believing in patriotism, the rule of law, sound finance, the sort of traditional Conservative virtues, seems to me a very good kind of conservatism.
Net zero? Is that a traditional Conservative policy?
Net zero is a policy that was passed by a Conservative government and promoted. The Conservative Prime Minister, it was Theresa May's government that passed the net zero obligation. The Prime Minister that has followed it most enthusiastically was Boris Johnson, who, last time I looked, wouldn't necessarily be regarded as a soft Conservative.
Although many on the right felt that that was the main chink in his armour.
Well, people can disagree with net zero if they like, but it is conserving the planet is a basic duty of people who believe in conserving our own country, the best of our traditions, that actually conservation in the widest sense is a lot of what conservatism is about.
But at the same time, you've incurred the wrath of the grassroots. You had this situation where you were deselected. What was that all about, if it wasn't about some of these issues?
That was about people who objected to the system of having an MP having an automatic right to... my constituency was cut in half, and I've been selected for the other half of it.
Yes.
So it was reported at the time as some great political coup, but it wasn't. Yeah.
Some might wonder, having served for 26 years, why you're wanting to run again if the Tories are facing what many pollsters predict as a sort of electoral oblivion.
Well, because I don't think we are. I think there's a chance. We've now seen the economy begin to turn. We've seen success on inflation.
Yes.
And in the end, that old Bill Clinton era cliche of it's the economy, stupid, is by and large true. And I think we will have, over the course of this year, a good economic story to tell. I think not just on inflation. I think it's very likely, all the signals are, that we will see significant tax cuts.
Would you like to see that? What would you like to see cut? There's been talk about cutting inheritance tax. There's been talk about raising the threshold, 52,000, to something higher. Dominic Cummings, in his meetings with Rishi Sunak, has suggested it be raised to £100,000. What's your reaction to that idea?
Well, I want the Chancellor to do as much as he can responsibly afford to do. You know, we've seen what happens when you try and do tax cuts that people think can't be afforded. So as much as possible and aimed at as many people as possible. So I think that it's got to be seen to be fair. It's got to be putting their own money back in the hands of as many hard-working people as possible. So
I mean, is it fair to tax people on inheritance?
Well, in an ideal world, you wouldn't.
So would you scrap IHT?
But it's all, I don't know what the Chancellor's figures will look
just
like.
a personal opinion.
But I would make the point that I think the Chancellor should concentrate possibly on income tax measures first.
OK, so is it fair?
More people. But also, the other point I would make is that's got lost in this discussion is that I think an essential part of both a healthy society and actually a society that is, if you like, more conservative, is home ownership. And I would very much like to see the Chancellor do something in the budget to promote people onto the housing ladder for the first time, to help young people become homeowners, because I think helping young people is really important for the party. We've lost a lot of support from young people, and also home ownership is a long-run virtue in this country, and I want to see Conservative governments promote that.
But when it comes to fair policies, is it fair that somebody on £52,000 a year pays 40% tax?
Well, I think, I would like to see everyone at every level paying less tax. To do that, you need to take tough decisions about public spending, and you can't just go for tax cuts without saying, we've got to get the public finances in shape first. And I very much agreed with what Liam Fox has just been saying to you about that.
You're saying you're hopeful about the next general election, whenever that may be, probably the second half of this year, if the Prime Minister is to be believed. But at the same time, it's your caucus that is a thorn in his side when it comes to this Rwanda plan. Because on one hand, you're saying that you won't vote for it if it's amended. And on the other hand, you've got the, I don't know, they're calling them the sort of 5 families of other Tory caucuses saying they won't vote for it unless it's amended. So once again, even though Rishi Sunak is facing the toughest electoral test of his life, we've got your Tories arguing with other Tories in the party.
Yeah, but the fact you've missed out of that is that if my Tories, if you want to describe that, One Nation Conservatives voted with the Prime Minister, supported the Prime Minister, and my friends and colleagues.
So you'll
on the right
support
of the
him
party
again if the legislation's amended?
We have said no. We've said that we want what the government has proposed. We have reservations about it, of course, and individuals will have different reservations. But nevertheless, partly because we can accept it, it doesn't break the law, it doesn't break our international obligations, but also because we are team players, we have got behind the Prime Minister.
But you won't be team players if Mark Francois has his way.
Wrong.
So if Bill Cash and Mark Francois have their way and amend the legislation, you won't vote for it. So you're only team players if your team agrees with the legislation.
Well, I would ask Bill Cash and Mark Francois to stop trying to amend the legislation, to
Why?
get behind the Prime Minister.
Well, they're saying it's not going to be effective at being a deterrent to deport people to Rwanda. We've still not deported anyone to Rwanda.
Well, of course we haven't, and that's why the government is putting forward this bill. But I am quite happy to support the Prime Minister's bill.
Do you want to see anyone deported to Rwanda?
Do I want to see anyone?
Yeah.
Well, I want the boats to stop. I mean,
but do you want to see anyone deported to Rwanda?
If it works, the government says it's going to act as a deterrent. I'm happy to accept
do you think it will work
on that? I think it will act as a deterrent, yeah.
But do you think it will actually work? Do you think we're going to see people deported to Rwanda?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
And you're OK with that?
Yeah, as long as we meet our international obligations. I mean, that's what's really important, this stuff about taking away the idea that you can take away any individual's right to appeal on any court case. That's quite dangerous. If you sent someone back who would be in danger there, then that's not the right thing.
But don't you think that illegal immigrants are just giving the government the complete runaround? And aren't you as frustrated as anybody on the right or wherever else at some of these people who are clinging on to their human rights, even though some of them have committed crimes in this country, can't be deported?
Yeah. Oh,
it's a scandal, isn't it?
It's a failure of the law as it currently stands.
Yes.
And so it is up to Parliament if it wants to change the law. But I think we need to change the law when we do, as we do all the time, is what Parliament does. In a responsible way that meets our international obligations and accepts that, for Britain to join Russia and Belarus being outside the ECHR, for example, the European Convention on Human Rights, would be a strange position for Britain to be in, as well as the effects on things like the Good Friday Agreement.
I want to ask you a couple of questions about policing. So very briefly, your reaction to Chris Skidmore announcing his resignation and standing down?
I'm pretty appalled by that.
Are you?
I'm disappointed that Chris has done that. His seat's abolished. He was standing down anyway. This is a wholly unnecessary by-election. I think he's being
Has he betrayed the Prime Minister?
Yeah, I think the Prime Minister will be entirely justified to feel very, very cross about this, and all his constituency workers who presumably supported him for years.
Can I talk to you in your capacity as a former policing minister about a couple of things? First of all, the police now investigating the Post Office. What's your view of Paula Vernell? Should she have her CBE taken away?
Well, the committee that looks at that has asked the government.
But personal opinion,
not
Damian.
to do it. Personal opinion. I personally think that it would do her credit if she voluntarily had to get back.
I mean, 600,000 have now signed a petition. I appreciate that people are now more familiar with this scandal because of the ITV documentary, but nobody's taken any responsibility for this at all. Should Ed Davey take some responsibility?
I think Ed Davey has got a lot of questions to answer, as ex-ministers will. I was thinking, well, what would I have done? And I like to think that if I'd been told hundreds of sub-postmasters have suddenly become criminals. I would have asked questions about that, because all my experience of sub-postmasters is that they are the definition of pillars of the community. And so the idea that hundreds of them suddenly were indulging in fraud and criminality was always an extraordinary accusation.
Yeah, but yet Ed Davey replies to Mr Bates and says, no, we shouldn't have a meeting, this isn't of interest.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why I think Ed Davey has got very serious questions to answer on this. I think he's in big trouble.
Let's talk about a very, very tragic story, the death of Harry Pittman. We have to be careful because proceedings are active. But in general, I mean, as a mother, I've got a 13-year-old son. He sometimes likes to go to Camden with his mates near where this incident happened on New Year's Eve. I think parents are frightened for their children at the moment. Knife crime has increased by 40% in the capital. What's the solution to this problem, Damian? Is it more stop and search?
I think there are two solutions. There's a government solution and a police operational solution, which is obviously that's an independent decision for chief constables and in this case the Commissioner of the Met. The government's contribution has to be to make sure that you have enough police officers, and that's a commitment that we've met. In 2019 we said we would have 20,000 extra police officers, and I know in my part of the world, in Kent, there are more police out there than we've ever had. Now, that's good. That's what politicians
It's not the perception of your constituents, though, is it?
No, it isn't. And because it is true, people haven't yet noticed, and that brings me on to the other point, which is operational. Those police need to be deployed doing the things that my constituents and the general public more widely want to see happen, and that will absolutely be in London. Tackling knife crime all around the country, making sure that every burglary, every housebreaking is properly investigated as soon as possible. People want the police to be doing that rather than some of the other things that they're criticised for doing. And that, as I say, it is not for politicians to tell any individual police officer, go and investigate that crime rather than this crime. But that is the job of chief constables. So I hope that around the country, chief constables will take the message that they need to be policing the streets. They've now got the resources to do it. They should be policing the streets in the way that the general public want to see them policed.
When I interview politicians, I always like to ask one question with just a yes or no answer, if you're capable.
And how often do they ever do that?
Very, very rarely, I've got to be honest. Do you think that the Prime Minister was right to have met with Dominic Cummings as Prime Minister twice last year? Yes or no?
I wouldn't have done so.
So that's a no. Thank you very much, Damian Green, for joining me this morning. Lovely to speak to you.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Wake up to the headlines with headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. Lovely to have your company. I'm delighted to say that Bridget Phillipson, the Shadow Education Secretary, joins me now. She's also the Labour MP for Houghton and Sunderland South. Nice to see you, Miss Phillipson. Thank you very much for joining me this morning. Now, you've said that you want Rishi Sunak to come clean about Rwanda. You're calling for the publication of documents which seem to indicate that the Prime Minister isn't exactly enthused by his own central immigration plan. Although my question to Labour would be, how on earth does that help solve the crisis involving illegal immigrants coming to this country in their droves?
Yeah, the Prime Minister this morning again refused to answer questions on this. I think it was far from clear about why his position has changed. It's because it's all about the Conservative Party. It's about internal management there. It's not actually about getting serious about dealing with the cross-border smuggling gangs, about making sure we are effective at tackling that we're cutting the backlog where it comes to asylum cases and stopping the use of inappropriate hotels. That's what Labour's plan involves, getting tough on the gangs and making sure we're clearing that backlog.
But if you don't support the Rwanda plan, what I'd like to know is if Labour does come into power and people have been sent to Kigali, what would you then do with those people? Bring them home?
Well, it's far from clear whether the plan will have sent anyone to Rwanda because, you know, we've sent more Home Secretaries to Rwanda than we have asylum seekers. And
but
even
if it does,
even if Rwanda were to be an effective intervention, well, even if it were to be effective, you're talking about between 100 to 200 asylum seekers. It's 1% of the backlog of claims that we're facing at the moment. So it's just not the answer. It's a gimmick. What we need to have is a serious plan, as Labour has set out, around tackling those cases, that huge backlog of cases, and ending the use of inappropriate accommodations such as hotels.
Let's get on to your patch now in education. I saw the interview that you did this morning with the Sunday Times. I know you're speaking at the CSJ this week, the Centre for Social Justice. They've just come out with a report about missing children. They've done a lot of reports on the missing children of lockdown particularly, and they've come up with this stunning statistic to suggest that 1 in 4 parents are pretty casual about whether or not they send their children to school. I mean, are these parents bad parents, Miss Phillipson?
It's deeply concerning, the levels of persistent absenteeism that we're seeing. I mean, my message to parents is that it's vital that children are in school. Every day at school counts. It has an impact not just on their kids' life chances, but also on the learning and opportunities for everyone in the class. Because what I hear from teachers is that it is disruptive if you've got people in school and then not in school. I know this is a complex issue that we're facing, and it does require a long-term plan. That's what I'll be setting out this week in the speech that I'm giving. But we've got to get serious about it. There has to be an urgency, and the plans that I'm setting out will provide support for parents and families who are struggling. So mental health counsellors in our secondary schools, mental health, open access mental health hubs in our communities, because it's about parents doing their bit, but about government doing our bit as well, and that's what an incoming Labour government would do.
OK, but an incoming Labour government is also going to put VAT on private school fees. The Independent Schools Council predicts that this could cause 40,000 pupils to leave the private sector and then need to be educated in the public sector. How on earth is the Labour Party going to be able to produce enough classrooms and indeed enough teachers to educate the children that can no longer be educated in private schools?
I believe that children in our state schools deserve urgent access to mental health support more than private schools need tax breaks. And that's just a straightforward question of political priorities. By ending the tax breaks that private schools enjoy, we'll deliver better mental health support, more teachers into our classrooms and improved access to help for our youngest children as well. That's what drives me. That is my priority. And I simply don't accept a lot of what's been said from the Independent Schools Council. And my focus will be on driving the life chances of the vast majority of children in our country who attend state schools, the 93% of kids in our country.
OK, so let's just set a Conservative estimate that the ISC has over-exaggerated the exodus that could happen as a result of your flagship, frankly, education policy, and only 20,000 private school pupils leave and need to be educated in state schools. Practically, how on earth are you going to educate them? Where are they going to be accommodated? You're the one that's been banging on since you've been in post that we don't have enough teachers and that classrooms are too full. So how are you physically going to educate these children whose parents can no longer afford the fees?
Because if you look at the work from the Institute for Fiscal Studies, the independent body that's considered all of this, they're clear that our policy would raise between £1.3 to £1.5 billion net. So taking account of all of that, that's a considerable sum of money that we could invest. I would say alongside that, private schools have year after year put up their fees way beyond inflation, well beyond the means of most parents, including middle-class parents who might have in the past considered sending their children to private school. But in addition to that, what we're also seeing is a demographic shift that means, sadly, we're in the position at the moment where schools are merging and closing because of the falling numbers of children that we're seeing in our country of school age.
I'm sorry, but you're still not addressing the question. I'm asking you in practical terms, are you going to have makeshift classrooms set up? Because Keir Starmer said that you're expediting this policy. You're not going to waste any time. So people could already preemptively be thinking, I'm going to pull my kids out of school come September. We've got an autumn election. You're 20 points ahead in the polls. Labour are going to get in. I won't be able to afford it. So how are you going to accommodate, as soon as you get into office, thousands more children in the state system?
As I say, I simply don't accept some of the rhetoric from the Independent Schools Council. But what we are seeing at the moment is what we're seeing at the moment in terms of a demographic shift within our schools means that we are seeing fewer and fewer children of school age coming through the system. Actually, we're in a position where, you know, in many parts of the country, schools are starting to merge or to close because of that shift. So, but I just don't accept the rationale.
But no,
alongside that, I would say
saying you don't
schools
accept
have decisions. Private schools have got choices they can make.
Shadow Minister, I'm sorry,
that they can make too. And the, you know.
That's not a practical answer to my question. And equally, we've got a number of much smaller independent schools saying that they face closure. So you've got a double whammy of parents pulling their children out of private schools and some private schools closing. You're advocating a policy that is closing schools down. What is going to happen in a practical sense to those pupils when Labour gets into power? You could be into power 1 month after the new school term and have a load of pupils with no classroom to attend. What's going to happen to them?
Well, in terms of what private schools have been saying, one private school last week was saying that they wouldn't pass on any VAT fees to parents, that they would absorb that cost and they would make it work. I think there are cost savings that private schools could make. They've put up their fees 20% above inflation in recent years. It is way beyond the means of most of your viewers to send their children to private school. More than £16,000 a year on average for one child. It's beyond most of the people that I represent. I imagine it's beyond most of your viewers. And that's why I want to focus on delivering a brilliant state education for the vast majority of our children in this country who go to state schools. That's my priority.
So as far as I can tell, we're going to have possibly thousands of children without school places in September potentially, but anyway, Ampleforth can afford it, Eton can afford it. Lots of much smaller schools have told the ISC they'll have to close down. I like to ask everybody on this show, first show of the year, a yes-no question, if you don't mind, Ms Phillipson. Chris Skidmore, he's abandoned the Tories. Would you like to see him cross the floor? Would you take Chris Skidmore into the Labour Party? Yes or no?
I'm not especially interested in that, no, to be honest. I'm more interested in winning the by-election in Kingswood that we're about to have. That's what I'm most interested in, and we'll be fighting a really tough campaign there.
All right, fair enough. Thank you very much for speaking to me this morning, Bridget Phillipson. Thank you. Now, don't go anywhere, because in just a minute, I'm going to be speaking to Laura Trott. Don't move a muscle. We'll see you very soon.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this?
Are you rethinking this policy?
Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. We're just waiting for Laura Trott, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, to be prepared for our interview. In the meantime, I'm going to bring Matt Goodwin in and ask you a little bit about what I'm going to talk to Laura Trott about. Matt's a professor in politics and pollster, does a lot of polling for us at GB News, so thank you very much for that, Matt.
Good morning.
We're going to come back to you a bit later in the show, but just give me a taster, because I found it interesting to see this morning that the Prime Minister's doubling down on his 5-point plan. He says the plan is working and I'm going to stick with the plan. The plan isn't working, though, is it?
No, it isn't. If you look at the polling, the latest polling that's come out over the last few days, we've done this with GB News, the Conservatives are in deep trouble. They're flatlining in the 23-24% range of the national vote. We've just had Damian Green in the studio saying, well, they hope voters are going to feel the big economic recovery. We know they're not. If you ask voters today, are things getting better or worse for you? More than half the country say things are getting worse. 2/3 say they want to see change in Westminster. They're very pessimistic about the cost of living crisis, but also, as we saw in that exchange between Michael Portillo and Damian Green, immigration. If you look at those 2019 Conservative voters, Boris Johnson's voters, the top issue for all those voters is not the cost of living crisis, it's stopping the boats, the number one priority. So Rishi Sunak, he can say, look, we're sticking to the plan, but as far as voters out there are concerned, it's not cutting through. They're not feeling the decline in inflation. They're not seeing progress on the small boats. And generally, They feel that Britain is moving in the wrong direction.
Matt, hold that thought, because I'm coming
Okay,
back to you after
okay.
this, and Laura Trott's ready now. The Chief Secretary to the Treasury joins me. Lovely to see you this morning. She's also the Conservative MP for Sevenoaks. Hello, Minister. Nice to see you. Look, the Prime Minister has said this morning he's going to stick with his 5-point plan because the plan is working. The only problem with that, of course, is that the plan isn't working. I've just heard from Matt Goodwin, who's done a lot of polling, to suggest he hasn't shifted the dial at all with the electorate. And equally, yes, he's brought down inflation, but the other 4 points remain to be fulfilled, and it's already a new year.
Well, look, Camilla, what we've seen in the last year since Rishi became Prime Minister is that the economy has turned a corner. You know, in the year and a bit ago when he took over, we were forecast to have the biggest recession that we've seen in 100 years. Inflation was over 11%. You know, we've now seen growth in the economy, you know, albeit small, and we want it to be more. And also, we've seen inflation come down. That's really important, and it's really important for people at home. So it is working. I know you're going to raise with me NHS waiting lists, quite rightly, because we have seen a really big impact as a result of the strikes. But what we've seen is where we haven't had those strikes, we are starting to make progress on the waiting list. So we hope that can get resolved, and we can continue on with that. And then on stopping the boats, obviously the numbers have come down of illegal migration over here by over a third last year, at a time when it's going up by 80% in countries like Italy. But we want to go further. We know we need to do more, and that's why we've introduced the legislation into the House of Commons to stop the boats. So we really are seeing progress. I know there's more to be done, and that's the argument that we're going to be making over the next year.
OK, I mean, we'll come on to the boats in just a moment, but you can't be happy with the growth forecasts. I mean, they're flatlining. Growth isn't growing. I mean, there's not increased growth forecast for the next 5 years. It's basically this. That's not something you can be happy with.
I totally get what you're saying. What I would point out is that the economy has had a really difficult time over the past few years. People at home have had a really difficult time. We've had the after effects of COVID, and then we've had the energy price shock. As I said, just over a year ago, we were forecast to have the biggest recession in 100 years last year. We've managed to avoid that. Now, you are absolutely right that we want to do more to encourage growth. That's why at the autumn statement we took a number of measures, including the biggest tax cut for business ever in terms of full expensing. You know, the OBR have said that the measures that we took over the last year will increase growth significantly by the biggest amount ever as a result of fiscal events. So we're doing all that we can to boost growth because we know how important it is for the economy.
I mean, you talked about the Stopping the Boats plan, which we know is one of Rishi Sunak's points in his 5-point plan. Having said that, the BBC has discovered that there are documents which suggest that he doesn't actually support the Rwanda plan. He was sceptical about the cost. He didn't even think it would act as a deterrent. So the Prime Minister doesn't believe, really, does he, in one of the government's flagship policies?
No, that's not true. I think when you're in the Treasury, you know, my job at the moment, I'm Chief Secretary to the Treasury, I am literally sceptical about most aspects of government spending. I will sit there, I will look at it, I will assess its value for money on every single aspect. So I am sure that he was asking a lot of questions about the policy. But look at his actions, look what he's done. You know, he's introduced the illegal migration bill into the House of Commons, the Rwanda bill, which will introduce Rwanda to this country and will mean that we overturn the issues that were raised by the Court of Appeal. It will mean that flights can take off to Rwanda, which we think is incredibly important because we know deterrence works. We've seen what happened with the Albania deal, where they do get returned to their country of origin, and numbers of Albanians coming over here has reduced by 90%. So this is why it's so important that we get the Rwanda bill through.
I know, but at the same time, Labour are now asking the government to publish some of this paperwork. I mean, will you do that? Because it's not really necessarily about him looking at the finer details. It was basically expressing a view that he didn't think the plan would actually work. And actually, he's been vindicated in that, hasn't he? I mean, you have sent more Home Secretaries to Rwanda than you have deportees.
Well, I mean, Labour will do literally anything to avoid talking about what their actual plan is, and that's because they don't have one on illegal migration. We do. That's why we're putting the Rwanda bill through the House. It's obviously not up and running yet, which is why we haven't seen people sent over there, but we hope it passes the House very soon, and then we can get these flights taking off.
Do you think that the Chancellor should scrap inheritance tax in the next budget? I know you're going to say I can't predict what the Chancellor's going to do in the next budget, but what I'd like from you, Laura Trott, is a personal opinion as to whether you think IHT is fair.
No, I don't think it's a fair tax, but I think, I don't like a lot of other taxes as well. And what we want to do as a government is bring taxation down, but in a fair way and in a way which is fiscally responsible when it is appropriate to do so. We will not risk fueling inflation again, and that is what we've seen. In other countries across Europe, we've seen inflation come down and then start going back up again. That is absolutely not something we're prepared to risk as a government.
What's the fairest way to deal with income tax increases then? Because we're going to see 3 million more people fiscally dragged over the next 5 years into that upper bracket. Is it fair for people on 52 grand a year to be taxed 40%?
Look, Camilla, I'm a Conservative. I believe in low taxes, but I also believe in paying back our debts. And we had to take some really difficult decisions to pay back our COVID debts. We spent £400 billion during COVID. We spent £100 billion on helping people with their energy bills. Those were, I think, the right decisions, but they've got to be paid back. That is the difference between us and Labour. Now, we're starting to do that now. We're starting, as I said, to see the economy turning a corner, which is why we're able to talk about tax cuts. But I don't shy away from the fact that we had to take some really difficult decisions in the interim.
I've had a couple of Tory MPs on this morning talking about Chris Skidmore standing down, resigning, saying that he's guilty of a betrayal of Rishi Sunak. Do you agree with that?
Look, I mean, Chris was a colleague, but I fundamentally disagree with him. I think he's just plain wrong in what he says. We and everybody knows that actually when it comes to 2050, when we come to net zero, we're still going to be using some fossil fuels, right? That is accepted by every expert committee. And it is obviously better that where those fossil fuels do have to be used, then they are produced domestically because we know that results in lower emissions. So it's right from our carbon emission targets, and it's right for our energy security that we produce things domestically, and I think most people at home would understand that.
And a final thought, if you wouldn't mind, Laura Trott, on the post office scandal. We've got talk of the police investigating. I know your colleague Jeremy Hunt's talk about compensation. We've got 600,000 people now supporting a petition to have Paula Venables, the former CEO of the post office, stripped of her CBE. Presumably you support that.
Look, the Post Office have clearly behaved abysmally throughout all of this. This has been an enormous miscarriage of justice, and I'm glad to see it's getting the attention that it rightly deserves.
Paula Venables, though.
Individuals, there's a process for that. There's so in terms of individuals, turning to your specific question, there's a process for that in terms of an honours committee for look at forfeiture. There's also an inquiry going on, so it wouldn't be right for me to comment on individuals.
Laura Trott, thank you very much indeed for your time this morning.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, I'm Marco Petagna. Here's your latest weather update from the Met Office. We'll see plenty of fine weather across much of the UK in the days ahead. Some sunshine at times, but equally a few hazards to contend with. All of a fairly wintry flavour with cold air in place across the UK. High pressure is dominating, sitting towards the north and northeast of the UK at the moment. Fairly tightly packed isobars down towards the south, indicating quite a brisk breeze. And that's feeding some showers in across the north of England, southern parts of Scotland this evening, working their way west into the Irish Sea towards the east of Northern Ireland as we head into the early hours of Monday. Some showers also developing down towards the southeast by the morning on Monday, could give some icy stretches as we head into the early hours of Monday itself. Towards the north and west, a cold picture, frost and some fog forming. And then through the day on Monday, ice likely to be a problem towards the southeast for a time as wintry showers move in from the east, working their way westwards but turning more to rain as they move across southern counties of England through the rest of the day on Monday. Whereas towards the north and west, apart from the odd shower across Northern Ireland, there'll be plenty of fine weather in store, lots of sunshine but still quite chilly. Temperatures no better than the low to mid single figures in most places. Tuesday promises to be a much better day, more in the way of sunshine developing after a frosty, locally foggy start. A lot of dry weather around too, lots of sunshine, but again, those temperatures really will struggle. Again, no better than the low to mid single figures in most places. Highs of around about 5 Celsius, that's 41 in Fahrenheit. As for the rest of the week, well, we'll gradually see an increase in cloud from the north, so sunshine becoming more and more confined to southern areas.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Carson, this Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation.